Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Charlene Lee. I'm sorry to be starting a few minutes late, a few technical difficulties. So today I am going to be talking about agents, AI agents in particular. So not the secret agents, not a travel agent, but AI agents. So I would love for you, because this is a pretty new area, would love for you to share any questions you have about AI agents. And the reason I'm particularly focused on them right now, first of all, Bill Gates earlier, I believe it was earlier this year, came out with a statement with his letter saying that AI agents are going to be the bomb, that they're going to be amazing. And we'll talk about some of the reasons why he thinks that, and also some of the reasons why I think that's going to be great. But I also will talk today about what are agents and just what do they look like? What do they do? Why are they important? What do we think about them? I'll give you a quick example of one that I saw recently at a startup event here in San Francisco. And I will also talk about what needs to happen, what needs to change in the space for us to develop and understand how agents can actually work in our world. So I do want to put out there that I have some slides available. I'm going to be sharing them today. So I'll just put them into here. You can also, let me just make sure I can get them here. Hold on for a second. I always forget to do these things, to put them in here. All right, so you can also get the slides here at this link at my site, charlinglee.com/AI-agents-2024, because a little bit less than a year ago, I also did something about the early agents that were out there, and I'll talk about that in just a second too. So first of all, let's get started by talking about what are agents and what do they do. So agents are basically these tools that allow you to program a computer to do things on your behalf. That's what an agent is. So an assistant, a virtual agent, a travel agent, a computer, an AI agent is simply an agent that will do tasks based on what you tell it to do. So there are a couple different types, and I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly and give some examples too. There are some already lots of agents in our world. We have simple reflex agents. We use these all the time. When you go to a website and you ask it for information, for example, to do customer service issues, even like going and do a customer support chatbot. You may get your password reset, for example. These are conditional-based rules that give the agent the answer. So if somebody asks this question, answer in this way. Model-based reflex agents are a little bit different. They have this internal model of the world. They can take some inputs from the outside world, turn it into the model inside the world, and then take action. So a good example of this is a self-driving car. It's, again, a very complex model that a car is using. I've had, again, I live in San Francisco. I often try to take the Waymo cars, these self-driving Uber-like cars. It's pretty amazing, and that they can do this. In fact, I feel sometimes even safer in those cars than I do with a human driver, especially if that human driver is me. And then the third type of agent is a goal-based agent. So these are agents that are trying to accomplish a goal that you set for it. So for example, I could say to a travel agent, I want to go to London and book me a flight, get me hotels, etc. And so these are good for making very complex decisions, and but also not necessarily on changing environments. So an agent in an AI space might be, for example, if a thermostat, a smart thermostat, like the one from Google Nest, then that would be an example of a goal-based agent. Save energy, but keep me comfortable in a certain place. So, and then let's see, going on, let's see, go find this slides here. And again, please put any questions you have about agents into comments, and I'll try to answer as many of those as possible. And then you have utility-based agents. So these are agents that act on your behalf to maximize or to optimize a particular outcome. So this might be some of those tools that you use today to optimize your ad buys, for example, on Google search or on banner ads or any type of advertising that's out there. It could also be, again, agents that are trying to make these financial investments, so like a robo-advisor, or if you set it to trade on your behalf to optimize against a portfolio for a risk and return, those again might be really good examples of utility-based agents. Two more to go through. Learning agents. These are ones that continuously adapt. I'm sorry, these are the optimized ad buys because it's taking more information in and then using that to optimize it. Or you're trying to learn a game. So the chess agent, like Watson, was learning to play a game and learning how to do it better and better from winning and losing. Same thing with the computer that played Go with all its gazillion permutations. And then finally, the one that is very interesting to me are these hierarchical and multi-agent systems. So think about a bunch of different agents that would go out there and act on your behalf. And there's a hierarchy to them. So there's probably one agent that has a rule that says, do these, optimize against this, accomplish these goals. And it has a bunch of smaller agents that it's running to get all those things done. So a virtual personal assistant might be a good example of that. So I'll get into an example of a virtual personal assistant in just a second, but I do want to share that I think it's so important to think about agents as something that already exists in our world. And so when we think about AI agents, we're thinking about how do they differ, how do they look different in this world today because of things like generative AI. So let me give you an example of one of them. And so this is coming from a company called Flood, floodhq.com. I saw them recently at an event here in San Francisco. It was run by my good friend and former partner, Jeremiah Aoyang, at an event called Llama Lounge. And he invited 10 startups, all in the AI agent space. So there are some that were looking at B2B services, others that were being a great sales and marketing tools, shopping assistants. And this one I was particularly taken with because it's a virtual personal assistant. And it's a little bit hard to see, but what you can see in the homepage here is that it's instead of showing you your inbox, right? Imagine when you open up Outlook, you see your inbox, you see your calendar, you see your to-do list. Here you see a welcome screen. And it's been organized by your virtual assistant, Flood HQ. And on the left-hand side here, it's looking at all the top topics that you have to care about. You've told it, these are the topics I really care about. It's reading through the headlines, the subject lines, and the content, and organizing them into different topic categories. It then has high priority and low priority things, and then it identifies the events you have to look at and also your tasks. And it's pulling all of these things out of your emails in your inbox. Now, what I find is so fascinating is that it's rethinking the idea of what your inbox looks like. Notice there is no inbox. I've been playing with this and it's a little disconcerting. It's a different way of thinking about the world. But if you think about what a true executive assistant would do, this virtual assistant is doing that too. It's having you make sure that you don't need to look at your inbox. And that is just going to categorize all the things you have to pay attention to. Look at these 4 emails first, and then these 8 that are related to clients, and these 3 that are related to your current project. For me, it's my book writing. So it makes sure that instead of going through reverse chronological order, your inbox, you're focusing your time and attention on a particular area and topic that is of great importance to you. And then it uses another agent to go and look for the calendar events and puts all those in the same place because you're just looking at your calendar at the same time. And then it also extracts all the to-do lists, looks at those, and then potentially can export those into your to-do list. Now, I have to say, playing with this, this is concerning to me because I get really nervous that I'm missing something out of my inbox. I don't completely understand and trust this virtual agent yet. But it's still really nice to be able to go through those topics and at least have my attention focused on those key areas that I care about, instead of, again, being torn between a calendar invite and some deep email that I have to think about and then something else. So instead of processing all of that and then doing my work, the virtual agent, Flood HQ, just does it all for me. Now, this is really interesting to me because the way that we work is very different from person to person. And the way we would want that virtual assistant to pull together that homepage is going to look different from one person to another. So again, it's harder for me to let go of my inbox. I get inbox oversight anxiety still. And it's a reason why a lot of people don't turn over their inbox to their assistants, even if they have one in real life, a human person, because they still want to get into those details and they don't believe that another human, or let alone a computer, would be able to do a good enough job as them. So this is the key problem, I think. What is it that we're going to have to do? What does the world look like if we're going to have these things available to us? Because they can be incredibly powerful. But at what point are we going to feel comfortable letting go of control and letting these agents come in and do things in our lives? So a couple points on this. I really want, first of all, talk about why AI agents are so interesting and why they matter. So the first point is that they streamline the interactions, and they basically use natural language for us to interact with them. So imagine, again, this is my favorite use case, is that I have my personal assistant, and instead of having a screen, I would just be talking to it. Show me the top 4 emails that are related to this. Give me more insight into that. So I'm just talking to it, and it can go find the information wherever I need it. Or if I'm traveling, I can give it broad parameters and we can have a conversation back and forth, just like a travel agent would. If they need more clarifications on how to do something, they would keep chatting back and forth with me. And so being able to use natural language to be able to do all of these interfaces and changes and interact with my agent is a huge breakthrough because of generative AI. And generative AI, again, just democratizes the access to all of these really powerful tools, because you and I, people like us who don't know how to program an agent, can actually use them and customize them and interact with them in ways that we have never been able to see before. It's also can really tailor those experiences, as I mentioned, because one person's agent is not going to be the same as somebody else's. And then the whole promise here is that it can reduce these tedious and mundane tasks. Now, generative AI already today is incredibly powerful, but you still need to be at your keyboard, driving the mouse, typing in the commands for it to do these tasks. And frankly, not many of them can go and actually execute. So there are plugins inside of tools like ChatGPT that you can plug in to get information from places like Kayak and Expedia to book your trip. But in the end, you still have to book your trip. You have to push the buttons on Expedia, on Kayak, to book your flights, to reserve a car, to get a hotel room. In the future, as these agents get more and more powerful, it can learn from our past history of how we have traveled, and it can ideally make those early discoveries, give you the options and say, would you like to book them? You say, yes, book this, and it'll just go do it. Now, that requires a lot of understanding on the part of that agent to do the heavy lifting and put in front of you those choices. And you also have to trust it that it's going to buy the right ticket and use the right parameters. Right now, the way I travel, I, for example, want to sit in certain seats on the aisle on the left side, so my arm on my right is free, so I can move it around as I'm working. If the flight is really full, I'd be more inclined to find a seat that's open next to me that's free. And there are various ways to anticipate which seats will be more free than others. Go and look on Seat Guru, for example, and find me the seats that are kind of wacky and avoid those for that particular plane, for that particular flight. It goes on. And that's not even before I thinking about points and their value and using points versus paying for miles, paying for with dollars. So you can see the way that we travel, even having a travel agent that's virtual is very difficult. And frankly, I wouldn't even expect my in-person travel agent to have to do this. And yet I can expect that my technical virtual AI agent would be able to handle this amount of information, keep track of it, optimize the outcomes, and work on behalf of me to run all these other agents and bots out there to be able to do these tasks for me. So I want to get into a couple questions here that people may be having. So first of all, thank you to Jay Bryant for posting up the link on the link to the slides on LinkedIn. And Jay also has this to share. I'm getting ready to build my own agent to help with content moderation. Ooh, Jay, that sounds really cool, because content moderation is one of those things that requires a lot of oversight and judgment and, frankly, empathy on behalf of who you're moderating. Because if you don't do it in a careful way, then how do you make sure that it's doing it in a fair and consistent way? So thank you for sharing that. All right, we have a couple questions here. All right, I think I'm going to read through this. Martin has this: what local AI agents can you recommend where I can input all my stuff to really sound like me and help draft emails, etc., and manage my calendar as well? Well, let me break that down into two things, because those are two very different tasks, Martin. One is drafting your emails and managing your calendar. First of all, I'll just say from calendars, I haven't seen anything that can truly, quote, manage your calendar. There are some ones that are out there that say you can optimize your calendar. It'll, for example, schedule meetings only during certain times. Right now, for example, there have been some long use tools like Calendly, but they're not necessarily AI driven. You still have to go in there, set the calendar events, and it's fixed in time. And it'll only offer the things that you have defined it to do. It's not an AI agent and smart and responsive to my changing calendars. So a better way to think about this is, hey, calendar scheduling thing, reserve at least 4 hours a day, block it off, and keep that as sacred. Do not block out and schedule into those times unless it's meetings with X, Y, and Z. Otherwise, preserve 4 hours a day for me to actually do work. So we don't see agents like that right now. But I think I've seen some early renditions of people looking at that. So I wish there was one. If people know of one, by all means, please share here. Drafting emails that sound like you, these are already out there. Again, Copilot can begin to do that. I use a software called Superhuman. I'm an investor in it, but I'll just tell you how I use it right now. It can actually draft emails for me. It can improve my writing, and it's looking at all of my past emails to try to figure out what I should sound like. It's pretty good. It's not quite there yet. But I'll tell you, the one tool that I use quite a bit, and I've talked about this in the past, is the tool like Dante-AI.com. And what they do is I can upload my entire opus of all my writing, all my written work. And when I go into there to compose, I'll say, write this with this, by tapping into the voice and tone and style of all of my writing that you looked at here before, because it's all uploaded. It's basically my own private large language learning model that has basically a little bit of RAG attached to a retrieval archive augmented generation. So it knows that this is the type of content, words, the way I put things together. Use that primarily as your inputs into your outputs. So I find that to be really helpful. ChatGPT as my GPT, again, you can do similar things, but having a draft embedded into your email right now, you're going to have to wait for Copilot, for people like Superhuman, Gmail, to get a bit better at this. Because again, that is the core way to think about it, that when I write emails to this particular person, this is what I sound like. Or if I'm writing about this topic, this is how I usually sound like it. And it could even pre-populate some of the responses. So let's see. I also, Martin has a question. If I experience AI pin, I think you're talking about the Humane pin that has an AI model. I have not used it, but I'll tell you some of my biggest concerns around that, around about privacy, about if you're collecting all of this data, what happens to it, what do you do with it, etc. All right, so one person here says, we still can't use the access features in iOS, for example, simply talk to my phone and execute apps. So agents are limited in many ways, but stay tuned. It will happen with dependability, fine-tuning, and trust. Great point. And I think this points to just how early we are in this process. We still can't connect natural language processing that comes with the power of generative AI to these tools who can then access the bots, the applications, the websites, and everything else, because we're waiting for those companies to build and enable agents to go do things on my behalf. So again, I think this is still very much early days. Jay Johnson has a question. What about the value of misdirection and making mistakes as we find in the quality of human actions? Yes, I would talk about that in just a second, which is a great segue into my very last point here today. Questions that need to be answered for AI agents to work. And so, Jay, you're talking about a lot of these questions here. How do we make sure that the agents are doing the right thing? How do we trust that it's going to be working on our behalf and not making mistakes? And I think there are all these questions that have to happen. And this is a fundamental issue with AI agents. It is a huge step up in us turning over the ability for this technology to make decisions on our behalf. It's one thing for it to control the temperature inside of my house. It's another thing to actually have it make decisions on my behalf that could make or break my financial situation, or could make or break in trusted relationships that I want to have or I'm trying to form. So the questions are, for example, whose ethics and values would dictate fairness? So a good example of this is the huge uproar that Google Gemini had when it was generating photos with very diverse people in its photos, except that it was also applying it to very specific situations like historical pictures of the signers of the Declaration, where it was all white men. It instead looked like the cast from Hamilton. So one is much more, some people call it woke and aware of cultural biases and differences. And so whose ideas of fairness and ethics and just these decisions get put into these agents? In a particular area where that's going to come into play is how we look at job descriptions, resumes, and evaluate who gets to go from that inbox of all these candidates coming in to the next stage, and so on and so forth. And so if we are going to use agents to help us make those decisions, then how is the agent programmed and tuned to our definitions of fairness? And the reality is there is no universal definition of fairness, not even inside of organizations and inside of teams or between two people. So being able to fine tune and define and understand what the agent is thinking about how it makes decisions is a key and very important part of our development of agents. And how much do we trust these agents with all of our data? What privacy safeguards are in place? And that's one of the issues with that AI pen, because it's on and its camera is there and it's looking at everything and recording everything. Do I have permission when I sit down and have coffee with my friend to record that conversation? How transparent do I have to make it that I'm wearing this pin, or is it going to be hidden away underneath my clothes so it's not so disturbing to people? So that kind of trust, not only in the agents, but in the people using these agents, is going to be key. And how are the agents get and use our data? I'm particularly interested in exposing information more than what is necessary. I'll give an example. When I go to a restaurant or a bar and I get carded because I need to prove that I'm over 21, and I have to do this to everyone. They're not basing it based on how you look, how you act. They do it to everyone. I show them my license that has all of my personal information on it. And in California, we now have these virtual licensees, and you can use that to scan a barcode to confirm that this person is over 21 without exposing my birth date, my address, all information that could be potentially damaging to me if it was collected by somebody. So this is why I think a very important role of blockchain in the future, that I can lock my data with blockchain, give it to an agent, have it use it for the particular purposes of what that agent is being asked to do these tasks. And then that's it. I get the information back. You can't keep it and use it. So that, I think, is going to be an interesting use of blockchain to be able to do this. A couple other quick points, and then I'll turn to some questions in here. How do you ensure transparency in how these agents work? For example, as it's making its decisions, what are the inputs it's taking? How is it making decisions? Do we have a paper trail so that if it isn't the answer that we expected, we can go back and correct it and say, oh no, this assumption that you made, you needed to check in with me. And that agent can learn over time how not to make that wrong assumption and instead potentially check if it's not 90%, 100% sure this is what I intended. And then finally, what kind of oversight are these agents going to have? How much human in the loop does there need to be to ensure that the decisions it makes are good quality decisions that take into account the impact it's going to have on you, on other people, on society? So how do we ensure that there's a human, at least in the beginning, to train these technologies, frankly, to develop some empathy and an understanding that what they do may or may not help the other side, the people in the end. So those are some initial thoughts about AI agents. And I know we did a bit of a deeper dive than I usually do, but there's a lot of conversations out there right now. And I encourage you to talk to your technology vendors, to talk amongst yourselves, to say, how can we develop these agents? Because what I think is the most important thing is that we now are beginning to have these tools to be able to create our agents. But if we can imagine what the work could look like, then companies like Flood HQ would be interested in being able to do these kinds of things. All right, so let me see what other questions we have here. Here's a great point here from LinkedIn user. There are some shops emerging that either offer a menu or buffet of Gen AI apps, and I'm hoping to soon find agents, then a Zapier-like way to weave them together. I think, again, a Zapier is one of my favorite tools, connecting these different APIs, these application protocol interfaces, for them to talk to each other and therefore be able to act in ways that, instead of hard coding it into the software and creating a whole new application, I just need this application to talk to that application and send the information back and forth. A great example of this is if I have notes inside my video recording program like Zoom, it can summarize those meetings, or it can take the audio of that, and I can have it sent to someplace like my CRM, or over to a place that over to my team on Slack, so that everybody can see the summary of the meeting. That simple translation can be done very simply with tools like Zapier to, again, make those connections, because it's basically a rule-based way, a simple way of saying if this, then that. And again, and if this and that is also another one of these. All right, let's see what else is here. Let's see, Martin has another question. How about a local blockchain data logger that logs all my local agent actions like legal purchases and bookings? Exactly. And right now, we, instead of logging all of them, which are the ones that are most important, Martin, because it gets really expensive if you're logging everything that's going on. So again, there's a bit of a judgment call in terms of what information your agent of your data is going to find, lock it, and then send it over to the place, and then make sure it's sent back and that they're not using it anymore. So again, this is, again, a very interesting use of blockchain that I'm seeing people use this with. There's some interesting uses and research being done around zero-proof verifications and zero-proof knowledge to be able to use this information to, again, verify, share, and understand different circumstances. Okay, a couple of last questions here. Do you think we will see these enabling AI agents via the super dominant services and gateways like Google Apps, Microsoft, iOS? Will there be layers and platforms to tie these services using our credentials, and the magic happens from there? So will there be central dominant toll gates controlling roads, or will there be a Wild West? I have a particular thought on this. When it comes to agents, the major platforms have a big advantage for two reasons. First of all, we are running so much of our lives on them already, and they are in a place to be able to be the foundational platforms for a lot of these agents. The second thing is we tend to trust them with a lot of our data and the activities that we do already. And are you going to trust a company that's been around for a long time? Maybe you don't trust them 100%, but will you trust them, or will you trust a startup you've never seen before with all of your data? And my sense is that this is where Apple in particular is putting its bets, in that it's going to let all these large language model platforms really try to beat each other out. And in the end, it becomes a commodity. And it's this new layer of applications and agents that become really the place that's a gold mine for this space. And what does Apple do really well? It looks at quality. It vets the apps that go into its app store for certain levels of privacy constraints and performance and quality. And I think it's going to do the same thing, because I do think these agents are going to show up as apps that tie into different pieces of data that you may have, again, using some back end to make sure that it's using the information in just the right way. All right. Let's see. One last question from Martin. Martin, you're on fire today. How about standard defined and public APIs between agents? And again, I think I talked a little bit about that. This is how the early agents are going to be built. And it's ways that you can go and actually build these quote agents on your behalf today. I'll give you one example. I'm really into optimizing my sleep, and I wear an Aura ring, and I have an 8 sleep mattress warmer in my bed, and it's programmed to have different temperatures throughout the night so that I don't get too hot, not too cold. And ideally, I can take the temperature readings from my ring and in real time adjust the temperature of my bed. That doesn't exist right now as an API. And so those are kind of the ways that I can imagine, again, being able to create these agents, make it work for me, make them personalized to the things that I want to have happen in my world. And these are all things, I think, in the future of why it's so interesting to have agents. I don't need to wait for a programmer to create the kind of experience that I want to have. Instead, I will be able to have my data, identify the type of agent and decisions and activities I want to have. And the whole goal here is to reduce the tedious and mundane things in my life so that I can get on to the more interesting things, either creating new products, looking at new research areas, or just plain having more time to have fun with my friends and family. So that was my very, very speedy tour through AI agents. And I hope that helps and also inspires you to think about different ways that you can have and imagine different ways that AI agents can have a role in your life and in your work. Because I do believe that in the end, the limits of these new technologies around AI isn't the technology, it is our imagination. And so similar to Flood HQ, what if you could imagine a world where there was no longer an inbox? What could you imagine a world where your calendar was managed based on your overall goals of what you want to achieve in life, and it ensures that you have time set aside to achieve those goals? So these are, again, different ways to be thinking about how we approach our life, how we approach our work, and also how technology can be molded to best serve us, our communities, our workplaces, and society in general. All right, that's what I have for today. Next week, I'll be talking about the top 3 ways organizations can get their generative AI strategy in gear. I believe this is what the topic is. I was in such a rush today. I'm pretty sure that's what I'm going to talk about next week, but it may change. So I'll be confirming that later on this week. But again, I'm very excited. I've been speaking quite a bit to different audiences, and this was one of the biggest takeaways. So I wanted to share with you some of the early responses I've gotten and how people are approaching these top 3 things you have to do to get your organization ready and able to use generative AI. So join me next week for that. And until then, have fun, stay safe, and I'll talk to you soon.